You should not walk into a board meeting without knowing what's going to be discussed and how it's going to be resolved. The board meetings are not for unknowns. The board meetings are for gathering information and rallying the troops. The best way to hang on to people is to acknowledge that they may not be at your company forever.
So, Chris, when you introduced yourself,
yes,
or when you did it earlier, you talked about how much energy this experience gives you.
Yes.
What you didn't do is your quick bio, and you have written many books that probably many of us have read. You're investor, incredible entrepreneur yourself. But can you tell us a little bit of your story in 1-2 minutes?
Okay.
We'd just love to hear about you.
1 to 2 minutes. Oh, yeah. we got a clock there, so I know how long I have. Okay, perfect. Quick story. Yeah. Grew up in Southern California in Santa Monica. Anybody from LA? A couple of people. Go Lakers. So grew up in Southern California, went up north to the Bay Area to go study undergrad at Stanford. I was a part of Stanford's product design department. I think that we have another product design department graduate over here. Yes, awesome. I graduated, and strangely enough, instead of staying in Silicon Valley, I went to Boston to join the internet boom, which is probably the worst decision of all time. But it worked out okay because I met my wife in Boston, so it
worked out really well.
It all worked out in the end. And then went to business school at HBS. I think there's a couple HBS grads in the crowd as well, at least 1 or 2 I saw, maybe.
You get 1 on all of these. Yeah.
1 or 2. And then came back to Silicon Valley. And so what I like to tell people is I've been in the startup world since 1995. So I'm going on 22 years now. Yeah. It's pretty astonishing. Yeah. And then in addition to doing standard Silicon Valley things like investing in companies, advising companies, helping one friend create a venture fund, helping another friend create a venture fund around investing in women and things like that, I also write books. So as Daniel mentioned, this is probably too small for the Facebook Live folks, but I keep these little things in my pocket. So this is sort of what the cover looks like. It's the Alliance. Came out in 2014, wrote with my friends Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, and Ben Casnocha. And Reid and I are working on another book this year called Blitzscaling, which is all about how do you grow companies extremely rapidly and how do you manage the stresses of companies that are growing extremely rapidly. Wow.
It's really stressful.
Amazing. How do you light that fire under people to get them to grow?
So before we go to the book that you read,
yes.
The Alliance, what was the key takeaway? And maybe I'll even say the most surprising key takeaway that would be translatable to entrepreneurs here.
So I think that the Alliance is all about what is the nature of the relationship that organizations and managers should have with their employees. And the biggest take is the best way to hang on to people is to acknowledge that they may not be at your company forever. Right? So the example I use with people is, if you've ever been in a job interview or conducted a job interview, at some point in time, someone asked the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Has anyone ever answered that question honestly? Everyone knows it's a lie. Even the job interviewer says, okay, basically this is the point of the interview where I'm going to ask you to lie to my face. And if you lie in the right way, we can check the box and move on. And so this is terrible, right? So the point of the Alliance is once you admit that most people aren't going to work for the same company their entire lives, although 40 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I think that was Gustavo's. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. Not going to happen for many of us in this room. And so once you admit that that's the case, you can say, well, let's be honest about what's going on here and build the kind of relationships that's based on trust instead of lies, and make sure we structure our time together according to what we call a tour of duty so that you know what your mission is as an employee, how you're going to help the company by accomplishing that mission, and what accomplishing that mission is going to do for your career in terms of progressing it forward.
So say more about the tour of duty.
Yeah.
I like how you framed that, but I want to dive into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the thing that happens with a lot of people, and they go to work, and the first day they go to work, and they're like, well, we're not sure what to do, but here's some papers, sign them. And then maybe they have a manager. And a lot of people end up drifting, and this is terrible. Like the one thing we all really want is purpose. And so the tour of duty is all around that purpose. Everyone who is working for a company ought to know the mission that they're on. Not just the company's mission. All of the fellows have companies that have incredible missions. But their individual employees have missions as well. Missions that are going to help their career progress, that may get them somewhere else in life, that may put them on a path to someday start their own company or do something different within the organization. And so the tour of duty is all about honoring those individual missions as well as the company mission.
And how do you ask the right questions to have the honest conversation with this prospective employee or your current employee to set the parameters of that tour?
Right. So the first thing we say is that as a manager, it's very intimidating for the employee, right? And I think that a lot of people don't like to talk about what they might do in the future or if they have concerns because they're like, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm feeling a little off here. And then the manager might say, well, don't worry, I can take care of that. You got 2 weeks, then you're out. And so people tend not to bring up these issues. And so what we always tell managers is you need to actually talk to the individual employees about your own feelings, your own experience. What are your values? What are your aspirations? What mission are you on and what are you trying to accomplish? There's also a fascinating thing. There's a guy named Kevin Scott, used to be the VP of engineering for LinkedIn. After the acquisition, he became the CTO of Microsoft. And when he's in job interviews, he'll ask the engineering candidate, this was back at LinkedIn, what job do you want to have after you leave LinkedIn? And that was a way of sort of breaking through and saying, okay, we're going to be honest here. And I understand that you probably aren't going to be here in 35 years. I don't intend to be here in 35 years, but let's figure out how we can make this time together special and meaningful.
I imagine there's a lot of people in this room, a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, who are hearing what you're saying, but also saying, yeah, but what about phenomenal teammates?
Absolutely.
You want to keep them more than 2 years. I mean, how do you react to that?
What I always tell people is that we don't try to argue that people should hop jobs. In fact, we believe that by being honest, you can actually have people have longer job tenures. We actually had one company that we worked with in the Middle East, of all places, that had their top 200 employees. They were worried they're going to lose them. So we helped them put them on tours of duty, and we checked back 1 year later, and they had 198 of them still at the organization. So when people feel like they have a mission, they're engaged, they understand how it helps them as well as how it helps the company, it keeps them around longer.
It's ironic.
Yes.
So you set them up to leave for 2 years, but then they stay forever.
I believe Sting said something along these lines, if you love someone, set them free.
Yeah.
Very wise man, Gordon Sumner.
So let's go into just on the team side of things. We've been sitting as entrepreneurs in huddle almost every evening, and one of the questions we asked was, who here struggled with co-founder dynamics? And I think everybody's ever had a co-founder raise their hands. Those who didn't, we said, you probably don't have a co-founder. How do you help? Because you coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and this is a tough thing. What is your advice to entrepreneurs as, there's two questions.
Yes.
Picking good co-founders,
yes.
and then when you hit an influx and maybe it's no longer the right working relationship, how to part from that? So
those are excellent questions, and in fact these are probably the most important questions that entrepreneurs often have to deal with. So I will share a bit of wisdom from Sam Altman, who's the president of Y Combinator. And he said, we see founder problems when one of two things happen. Either the founders want the same thing or the founders want different things.
It's so true.
But it's so true. It's so absolutely true. So a couple of things I always tell people about founders. Again, most of the time people come to me, they've already formed a founding team. But sometimes they're looking for co-founders, and I tell them, listen, first of all, you don't know people until you've actually worked with them. So the ideal thing to do is to actually spend time with them, working together on something, a real project of some kind. I also tell people, you know what, you guys ought to take a trip together. Because it's very easy to appear normal, sane, non-psychopathic for like 30 minutes to an hour at a time. Very hard to do it for 48 hours at a time, especially if you haven't had any sleep. The final thing is when it comes to those co-founder conflicts, like for example, there's conflicts around equity, there's conflicts around decision making. You have to emphasize to people, this is not consensus. Not everyone is always going to get what they want. What we're looking for is just that we agree on the process by which we decide on the outcomes. And if we agree on that process, whatever the outcome is, we'll consider it fair because everyone had a fair shot. The final thing I think you mentioned is what happens when you do actually need to part. I will say that a lot of times it's not necessary for a co-founder to leave an organization. Maybe that co-founder has a set of expectations around, I'm always going to be the head of engineering or I'm always going to be the head of sales. And you have to take them aside and say, well, this isn't going to work anymore because that was great when we were 10 people or 100 people or when we were selling 10 million a year. Now we need to sell 500 million a year. You just don't have those skills. And so a lot of it is about setting those expectations up front. That's where the alliance comes in. Being very clear about the fact that when companies grow and change, oftentimes the skill sets that are required change. But if you can, you want to keep those co-founders on board. Obviously, they're amazing people. Otherwise, you wouldn't have chosen to start the company with them. They can still create a lot of value for the organization. They just can't still be in the same role. So sometimes you can find a different role where they're a spokesperson, or they have an individual contributor role, or they're leading a smaller team, just whatever it takes to keep them on board. If they can't actually make that work, which absolutely happens, then the best thing is just say, well, you know what? You're going to be an alumnus of the organization. We're going to have a long-term relationship. The alliance is about a relationship that's not just an employment relationship, but a personal relationship. And can we remain allies even if we no longer work together?
Brilliant. It's really well said. I have so many more questions, and we don't have enough time.
We have 1 minute, 40 seconds, but I'll talk even faster.
Well, I'm learning a lot here, so this is really good. So, in terms of the alliance between entrepreneur CEO and their board, how do you think about that?
Interesting question. Yeah. So, a lot of times when entrepreneurs are thinking about their board, they're thinking about it in the wrong way. They think about the board as if the board is my boss. And the board is not actually, I mean, technically they are because they can fire you. But if you have a good board, they don't want your job.
Totally.
And they definitely don't want to do your job.
Yeah.
And versus your boss presumably actually knows what they're doing. The board comes in every couple of months or every month to help you out. So what you have to think about your board instead are a group of stakeholders who are essentially employees who pay you. So what I have to tell people is, first of all, first lesson of board management, have an independent relationship with each board member in addition to those board meetings. Yep. You should not walk into a board meeting without knowing what's going to be discussed and how it's going to be resolved. The board meetings are not for unknowns. The board meetings are for gathering information and rallying the troops. The second thing is that when it comes to the board members, you have to... So I'm a board member of a number of organizations, and fortunately for those organizations, I'm very lazy, and so I don't cause this problem. But a lot of board members do, which is they say, well, I'm a member of a board. I had to do something useful. And if you as the entrepreneur don't give the board... If you as... No, exactly. I'm like, oh, what? You want me? Oh, crap, I got to show up. But if your board members aren't getting some sort of homework for you, if they don't understand how they can help you, they will figure out a way to help you on their own. So when you manage boards, the whole point of managing boards is to give them something to do. They are employees who pay you. And so figure out how you can actually leverage them. Most of them, if you had to pay them as a consultant, you'd be paying them like $1,000 an hour. So think about the amazing value you have at that board meeting. Look at it as an opportunity rather than a chore.
I love it. Last question.
Yes.
You just hit time, but this new book.
Yes.
As you've been writing it and going through that journey, what is the most surprising pattern or lesson learned that you've come across in this new one?
Gosh, there are so many, but what I will say is this. I'll give you the broad arc of the book, which I think was sort of the insight that came to us after spending a couple years wrestling with this. So we were looking at companies in Silicon Valley and other places around the world that had grown really rapidly. A company like Facebook, for example, which goes from being in a dorm room to being worth $100 billion in the span of a decade or something like that. And what we realized is that in most cases, and I think it's true of the companies in this room as well, the inciting incident is some sort of technological innovation. Where it's very rare there's a giant opportunity that everyone in the world has just overlooked. There's usually some new kind of innovation, some new plant that you discover, some new technology that no one's ever put together before in terms of an urban app or what have you. And that's the inciting incident. But that technology alone is not always enough. Maybe if it's purely a scientific discovery it is, but most cases it isn't. The next step is really the business model innovation. Figuring out what is the right kind of business model. And in terms of blitzscaling, we look for business models where there are growth factors that allow you to grow very quickly, and there are ways to get around the growth limiters. So growth factors are things like the market size or network effects that make your company stronger as it grows, and growth limiters are things like a lack of product market fit or if there are operational scalability concerns. And if you look at all these companies, Amazon or Facebook or Google, you can trace the growth factors involved that help them grow, and you can trace the growth limiters that they had to find ways around. And the final part of it is just, as a company is growing really quickly, all those issues that we talked about with co-founders start to come in across your organization. That you'll have not just co-founders where the role might change, but everyone in the organization. And we define the stages of the company, of blitzscaling, as sort of powers of 10. So you start as a family, then you become a tribe, then you become a village, then a city, then a nation. And a family is like numbered in the ones, and a nation is numbered in the tens of thousands. And each stage you're going up an order of magnitude. Well, in most cases, as a company goes from one order of magnitude to the next, the executive team you have running that organization is going to change by about 30 to 50%. Right? The people who are good at running a 100-person organization are not necessarily the people who are good at running a 1,000-person organization. Somebody like Mark Zuckerberg is still running Facebook, but my co-author Reid, got out of running LinkedIn almost as quickly as he could because it's not what he wanted to do.
Yeah. I think there's so much more wisdom within your head and heart, Chris. We just got a sampling of it, but thank you so much.
No,
for joining
thank you.
us.
Thank you.